It is time for my top 10 book picks of 2016. Most of you guys know I am a huge book nerd. Photography monographs are one of my favorite things. They don't devalue themselves like photography gear, and they're inspiring and they're awesome. And so I did this last year and I want to do it again this year, but this is kind of my top photography book picks for 2016 for the last year. Some of these books did not come out in 2016. I just got them in 2016. Most of them I have shared with you. A few of them I have not. But I'm going to start with this one, which was a gift that came to me this year from my friend Thierry in Paris. And this is Catherine Ballet's Looking for the Masters in Ricardo's Golden Shoes. Thierry worked with her and she did an exhibition of these works at his gallery. And this was a gift from him. And I love this book. It is absolutely amazing. And so what this project was, is it was a recreation of many of the classic photographs throughout history, but they were done with this spin of the photographer using her friend Ricardo, and usually in every image you see his patented golden shoes. It's really interesting to me because what her intent with this book was to provide a bit of context in our relationship in the current day with the photography of the past. And now we are in an age where photography serves a very different purpose in our lives. We use cell phones to record pictures of our kids, take selfies. And so the imposition of Ricardo into each one of these images is pretty cool. And it's very impressive how close to the original images these really are. And this was a tremendous book, and I think it was super quirky and definitely a pick for my best of 2016. Next up is Jacques-Henri Lartigue, and this is Lartigue, Life in Color. This is highly recommended. Lartigue is mostly known for his black and white work. He had a very long, prolific career. Most of his best known works were very early. They were works that he shot as a kid. And I think that they're very famous in that sense because there is this sense of the unexpected and excitement and thrill of a snapshot, but they're very well done. These were hard images to get when he was a kid. I mean, this was very early in the 20th century, and when he was about 10 years old, he grew up in the lap of luxury, shot many of these photos, but Life in Color is a later book, and Lartigue did not maintain his wealth his entire life. He lost most of his family fortune and ended up making a living with some photo assignments and then also painting. And his color images that are a little bit later are absolutely beautiful, and these are lesser known works. And so this was a real find this year to see Lartigue in color. They're very different in that the element of surprise is not as prevalent as you would expect, but they have a whole different beauty and an adjustment that he made as an artist. So they're not typical images you would expect out of Lartigue, but there is definitely a relationship to his style. So anyway, I'm going to link all these in the show description, but highly recommended is Lartigue in Color. Next up, and I'm cheating a little bit because I didn't actually get this year. I got it last year, but it is back in print once again and fairly easy to find. But this is the reissue of Henri Cartier-Bresson's The Decisive Moment, which is probably one of the most famous photography monographs in the history of photography. It didn't do so well when it came out, surprisingly, but it is still regarded as kind of the Bible, so to speak, for street photography, definitely. The printing on this is very true to the original. It's got the Matisse cover, and the printing inside is somewhat reminiscent of the way the book was originally printed. However, it does say in the notes in here, you can read about it, that the original book did have some glue problems and was coming apart. This one does not. It also has a secondary booklet in here that talks about the process behind the book, the making of the book, how it came to be, and Henri Cartier-Bresson's approach to it. And he does talk about his approach to composition, and it's particularly with elements of dynamic symmetry and such in here. And this is just a fabulous book. This is kind of a must-own if you love photography or love street photography. This is really the king of all books. Next up is Dave Heath. This is Multitude Solitude, which is a reissue of his most famous book with a much more expanded edition of photographs. Dave Heath is a really interesting photographer, and I think he is extremely underrated. He's somebody who kind of came after the great New York photographers that were shooting for Life magazine, people like W. Eugene Smith or even Henri Cartier-Bresson. And Dave Heath went with that same style, but with a fine art approach to his career. So he didn't actually ever pursue publishing in magazines, but he made these early, what he called maquettes, which were these layouts. And he was very obsessed with the relationship that photos had to each other in sets, which I think is extremely mature considering he was pretty young when he did these, and really interesting as well. His style is wonderful. If you love W. Eugene Smith and you like that era of photojournalism, I think you're really going to love Dave Heath's work. On a sad note, Dave Heath also passed away this year. He was somebody that I had reached out to as part of the artist series, and unfortunately that was never to be. But I do have a soft spot for Dave Heath, and I absolutely love his work. This book is absolutely brilliant. It is well worth it. It is massive, and I really can't say enough good things about it. So that is Dave Heath, Multitude, Solitude. Next up, you guys are going to hate me for this because this book is very difficult to find, but this is Strada, which I did a show on almost a year ago. And Strada is a collection of street photography from Italy. And this is all right around World War II or post-World War II. And you probably haven't heard of most of the names in here. This is some obscure stuff, but a very beautiful, beautiful collection. I think one of the reasons that history has not been very forgiving to this movement going on in Italy is because most of these photographers were working as photojournalists, and they were very much inspired by Life magazine and a lot of stuff that was being done in the USA at that time. However, I would actually argue, if you look at a lot of the images in here, especially the experimentation with cropping, with composition, I think it takes it to the next level, and that's why I think this book is kind of essential, because this is really kind of a missing piece, I think, in the history of photography. I happened to run into several copies of this in a used bookstore last year, and I'd never seen it before, and I picked a couple of them up, and since it has become very difficult to find, this would definitely be on my list of books that I would love to see reprinted at some point. I think there's a tremendous audience for this, and I think the tremendous value in the work here, but this is Strada. The next two books are by the same photographer, and these are some of my favorites that I've gotten this year. Laura Wilson, who I featured on the Artist series and had the enormous pleasure to get to do a short film and interview with this year. Laura is absolutely amazing. This is a retrospective called That Day, Pictures in the American West, and I'll explain a little of this. So Laura, when I met up with her last year earlier this year to start the Artist series, she was doing a solo exhibition at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art here in Fort Worth, Texas, and the show was absolutely brilliant. These photos were really big, but this is the catalog from the show. Her work is a little bit harder to come across because she hasn't had a whole lot of monographs out. So for this being the first really solid one, I think is amazing. Now, Laura has several other claims to fame. She is Owen and Luke Wilson's mother, but she is also known for her work as Richard Avedon's assistant from his seminal project in the American West, which was done in the late 70s, early 80s. Interestingly enough, the Amon Carter Museum is where she had her show. That was the museum that actually commissioned Richard Avedon to do that work. And the second book I'm going to recommend to you is this one, which is called Avedon at Work in the American West by Laura Wilson. This is Laura's work following Avedon. So this is basically a behind-the-scenes look at the whole project in the American West. And she talked about some of this in the interview that I did with her that you can see. But she was talking about Richard Avedon's affinity with people and the fact that when he was doing the portraits of these coal miners, they actually did a little exhibition on the side of a Quonset hut and had it ready. So when the miners came to work, they saw pictures of themselves and their friends from the year before and how amazing that was. And this is a really interesting insight into both Richard Avedon and also Laura Wilson, particularly on that project. So that is Avedon at Work in the American West by Laura Wilson. Up next is another from the Artist series. This is Keith Carter, and this is From Uncertain to Blue, which I have also shared on the show before. Keith is one of my favorites. He is an exceptional human being. I have not released the video yet, but I did an Artist series on him as well. Any of Keith's books you cannot go wrong with. They are all exceptional, and he has done many. This one is special, and we talked about it a lot in the interview that you will see. But this one, to me, is Keith's earliest work, and the style that he became later known for isn't as developed in this. But I think this was a moment of discovery, and it was interesting because when we were talking about it, we were talking about the significance of Robert Frank with the Americans and how that book really followed him around for his whole career. And Keith has an affinity for this book because he felt it was a big turning point. I also think this is an interesting book because the whole point of this book was Keith and his wife decided to take this little journey that they would pursue every now and then of going around Texas. He lives in Beaumont, of going around Texas and visiting small Texas towns with very quirky names like Uncertain and Blue and Diddy Why Diddy and many others. And so he said a lot of times you'll get there and it's nothing but a crossroads and a mailbox and maybe a house. And so there's nothing to shoot. And so it was the process of doing this over and over again and the way the pictures grew into a set and they worked as a whole. And I think that this really is I don't know if I'd say it's his most amazing work because it was so early, but I think it is very significant in his career and is one of my favorite books of his. But that is From Uncertain to Blue by Keith Carter. Next up is Graciela Iturbide, Eyes to Fly With, and I have not shared this book with you guys, but this is one of my favorites, and she has very quickly become one of my favorite artists ever. She is a wonderful photographer, studied with Manuel Alvarez Bravo, lives in Mexico City, and I had the honor to go down to Mexico this year to interview her for the Artist Series, which is another video that will be coming out. This is an excellent cross-section of her work, and Graciela is phenomenal. There's an enormous amount of symbolism, of mysticism, and I think spirituality, wonderful use of metaphor in her work. You see themes of death. There's things like her use of birds, which to her represent creativity and life. I think Graciela is absolutely fantastic, and I think that if you want to start somewhere, all of her work is exceptional, and this is probably the best in terms of just being a career retrospective with a lot of different things in it. But this is Graciela Iturbide, Eyes to Fly With. And last but not least, my favorite book this year, and this is a very biased opinion because I got to interview Alexei Titorenko for the Artist Series, and we have become friends and stayed in touch, and he is one of my favorite people and one of my favorite photographers. I think he is absolutely brilliant and outstanding. This is The City is a Novel, which is his monograph that came out this year, and I think this is a really excellent, well-produced cross-section of his work. It's fairly easy to find. And Alexei's brilliant. He's probably most known for a series of images he took in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, and so this would have been the late 80s, early 90s. And he started experimenting with these forms of doing really long exposures that, when you put them in the context, the landscape stays very still and very sharp, and then these crowds of people move through. And to him, these became somewhat narrative of the situation that was going on with the rise of poverty, violence, and the general feeling that Russian people had with this major government change that was taking over. And what's interesting about this book is it also includes some of his more recent work where he has taken the same approach and applied it to places like Havana, Cuba, and even New York City, where he lives today. And anyway, I think this is such a fabulous book. The texts in here are extremely good. If you want to know more about his life and where he came from, this is an excellent place to go for that. It is one of my favorite books, and of course Alexei is one of my favorite people, as you guys know too. And so that is probably my top pick for this year. It is my favorite book that I've got in my collection right now for very personal reasons, but all of these are essential and very good. So anyway, I just wanted to wrap up by doing a top 10 of the year, and as you guys know, I am very fond of monographs and photography books. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, please remember to like it, share it with your friends, and as always, subscribe to The Art of Photography so you'll always be up to date on the latest and greatest whenever I put out a video. Until the next one, I'll see you guys then. Later.